what we are going to do today is we are going to talk about radiology in spine. The take home from that should be that each of you guys should be able to read the images, the X-rays, the MRIs on your own. You don't need to read it like a radiologist, as long as you're able to find out the the basic crux point. That's also good enough. Let's have a common scenario that comes to us, which is 80% of the time, where a typical old person comes to you with a back pain, which increases towards the end of the day, and has been taking painkillers, some local compresses at home, and still the patient is having no relief of pain. Now, just by the history, you will be able to, you start thinking in your head that it's a mechanical back pain, nothing, not a biggie, and we'll be able to easily solve all of this, right? But here, what would you like to do in terms of investigations? So the basic investigations that either the patient is going to come with or you're going to do is an X-ray. Why X-ray? Because it has got several advantages. One, it is a very quick imaging. Second is that you can actually see what is happening when you are in a dynamic view. So sometimes a patient might be absolutely fine when he is static, but when he's dynamic, you can see a gross thing. So for example, if there's a lytic listhesis which is mobile, or if there's a fracture which has gone into non-union, the only way you can identify that is with the help of dynamic X-rays. Sometimes we know the diagnosis. We know that it is it's a very simple mechanical back pain. But what happens is, unless and until you do some investigations, the patient himself is not satisfied that you have the correct diagnosis. So it also has a little bit of psychological effect. And good old days, it was combined with a myelogram to give a dynamic imaging. Of course, that's for historical purposes. It's not used right now. The disadvantages of an X-ray is it's a two-dimensional image, which means you can see it either in lateral or in AP. You don't know what is happening in the third dimension, okay? The other thing is that for something to be absolutely audible, something to be absolute, for something, sorry, someone is just messaging. So for something to be absolutely visible on a X-ray, there should be at least 40 to 50% of bone loss. That's why it's not a very sensitive and a very specific investigation. See, a specific investigation is something that is very specific to a condition, which means that if suppose, for example, a malaria test, antigen-based malaria test is a very specific test, which means if we put that test on, every patient who has got malaria will be detected in that, okay? But there are certain tests which are very sensitive but not very specific. A sensitive test is something that is going to pick up everything, which means it will pick up malaria also, it will pick up dengue also, and all the other kind of febrile illnesses. So the best form of investigation is something which can be sensitive or specific both, okay? So that's basically about the sensitivity and specificity, because we're going to talk about that later on. Yeah. So this is typically how your X-ray is going to look. What you have to see on an X-ray is you have to see first the AP view and the lateral view. See that your X-ray is covering everything that you want to see. So technically, an ideal X-ray of a lumbosacral spine should show the entire lumbar spine, entire sacrum, and part of the lower joints, which are the hips and the knees. Okay. So now coming to basic reading of an X-ray. Whenever you read an X-ray, first you have to see that the view is fine and it's covering everything that you want to see, which means if the patient is having a problem at the lumbosacral junction, there is no point in doing an X-ray at the dorsolumbar junction. Okay. That's why see that you are covering all the points properly. Otherwise, sometimes the patient has got a problem over here, and this is where your X-ray is there. So once you have an X-ray in front of you, see if there is adequate exposure and everything is covered. Once that is there, in the lateral view, you have to first see for the alignment. Sorry. Yeah. In the lateral view, what you have to see is you have to see the alignment, which means see if all the body are stacked up on top of each other.
if there is a listhesis, then one body will be shifted ahead of the other body such that the posterior borders will be different. Okay. Then the next thing that you have to see is grossly the appearance of the body. How are they looking? Are they looking like normal bone? Are they looking whitewashed, means hardly you are able to see bone and you're just able to see the periphery? Are you able to see all the standard landmarks, which means are you able to see the body? Are you able to see the pedicle? Are you able to see the pars? Are you able to see the joints and the spinous processes? Okay. Once you have seen that, then you have to see the disc space or the empty space between the two body. Once you see all of that, you'll get a basic idea of, one, if it's a correct x-ray, two, what is the quality of the bones, is there any osteoporosis, or there is no, or the bone quality is good enough. The third part you are seeing, is there any defect, so is there any fracture of the spinous process, or is there any lytic defect? So these are the things that you are able to see if there's any defect. And finally you have to see the height of the disc space. So you compare the height of the disc space year with year with year with year with year, all these things. Any place where the disc space is reduced, that's the place that you have to be that you have to watch for, because most likely that person is having a problem at that area. And lastly, you have to see the foramen or the height of the foramen. So you see this is the place that the nerve exits from. If you correlate that on a model, this is exactly what you're seeing on the x-ray. Yeah, you're seeing the body, you're seeing the pedicle, you're seeing the pars, you're seeing the pars over here, you're seeing the joints, okay, and you're seeing the spinous process, and finally the foramen through which the nerves are going. So this is what you're seeing on a lateral view. As soon as you shift to the AP view, which is this, that means you're seeing the spine like this. So when you're seeing the spine like this, again you have to see the alignment, one. Then you start noticing the spinous process, if they are all in the same line or if they're shifted. If they're shifted, which means then there is some degree of rotation, or there is some so that is the other thing that you have to see. Then here specifically you need to observe the pedicle. So you see this goal things that is staring at you, these are the margins of the pedicles. So from top to bottom you have to see the pedicles. Pedicles are gateway to the spine, which means when you're looking at your spine like this, you're seeing the spinous process, which is over here. Then you're seeing the pedicle margin, which is over here, and the pedicle connects with your body. So let's say if there's any disease in the body, then the pedicle margin can be obliterated. So that is the other thing that you see. So grossly, this is what you're going to see on an X-ray. All right. Few example of what you actually, what I mean is this type. So here you see something. This is a lateral X-ray of the spine showing that the bodies are all okay. The intervertebral space is okay. There are some degenerative osteophytes which are seen on the margin. You can see the pars over here is fine, the pars over here is fine, but you see this, there is some kind of a breakage in the pars over here. Okay, so that is lysis. All right. Now, if you see in the AP view, what you can see is the spinous process here is okay, here is okay, here is okay. Here there is some gadbad. It is not joining together. So this is spina bifida. So sometimes if you're not able to identify a lysis on an X-ray in the lateral view, what you can do is AP view. If you find something called as spina bifida, a lot of times spina bifida is associated with lysis. Okay, so you should correlate both of this together. Understood? So this is how lysis is going to look on an X-ray. On the other hand, this is how a degenerative listhesis is going to look, wherein this all is in one line, but if you see here, there is a shift. Okay, so this is an X-ray of a spine which is doing this. Now, when you are extending the patient, this is again coming back into its place. So that is the importance of a dynamic view. All right, that is how degenerative listhesis is going to look on a X-ray. Other important place where X-ray can help you is to differentiate between dish and ankylosing spondylitis. So dish and ankylosing spondylitis both is going to clinically present with stiffness, metabolic type of pains, multiple aches and pains, a decrease in range of motion. When you see an X-ray, X-ray which is looking pretty bamboo spine types, which means it's looking like a straight single bone with markings here, just similar to an bamboo, will be an X-ray of an ankylosing spondylitis. But X-rays where you are seeing extra big bone formation, that is an X-ray of a dish. Practically, it is not very significant. Clinically, theoretically, yes, if it's ankylosing spondylitis, there are different medicines that you can give in the early days. Also, in patients of ankylosing spondylitis and dish, you should always remember that there are chances that these osteophytes can fracture, and that can be the result of sudden exacerbation in their pain. So that's X-ray. And lastly, you can identify tumors on an X-ray. So when you have a tumor, a typical sign that you can see is called as a winking owl sign, where the pedicle margins, which you are able to see on an AP view, gets completely that goes away. And that is basically what winking owl sign is, which, so you get an idea just looking at an X-ray that there is some problem in the body. Okay, so that's all about X-ray. Quickly summarizing the importance of an X-ray: it is a very cheap investigation. It is available in every street of Bombay. Patients are satisfied that you have done some investigations, and it gives us good idea about, one, the quality of the bone, if there's any gross fracture, if there is any gross decrease in the disc space, if there is any lysis, if there is any listhesis. If there is a lysis or a listhesis, is there a dynamic component to it, or is it a static component, or is there any other problems like tuberculosis or like infection or tumor? So this gives you a broad idea about the X-ray. One other thing that X-ray tells you about is spasm or loss of lumbar lordosis, which can give you a hint that the patient has had an acute episode inside. So that is how you interpret an X-ray. From now onwards, you start doing that. Whenever a patient comes with an X-ray, try to read the X-ray, then read the report, and then correlate clinically. Within no time, you'll be able to start reading your own X-rays. All right. So that's basically all about X-rays. Any questions? One question is that what is dynamic X-ray? So a dynamic X-ray is basically X-ray taken in different positions of a body. So it can be a flexion extension X-ray, where an extension is taken in X-ray is taken in complete extension and in a complete flexion position. Or it could be a sitting supine X-ray, where the X-ray is taken in a supine position or in a sitting position. So these are basically dynamic X-rays. So always and always, you should always clinically assess the patient first. Then you should see the read the X-ray and then go to the radiological report. Never ever read the report first and then examine the patient, because by nature you're going to get biased. Okay. Now, someone asked me, what does 40 to 50% bone loss mean? So now see, let's consider a case of tuberculosis. Okay. If suppose the patient has got tuberculosis, the disc space starts getting infected, then the bones are going to start getting infected, then the bones will start getting destroyed, and then the spine will start collapsing, and there will be a lot of pus formation. This thing to be seen on an X-ray, the disease should at least destroy 40 to 50% of the bone. Otherwise, you will not be able to see it on an X-ray, which means the X-ray will completely look normal, but the patient will have tuberculosis. That is basically what I mean by 40 to 50% of the X-rays being 40 to 50% of the bone loss, after which only you can see the something on an X-ray. Okay. Indication of dynamic view is when you have conditions like lysis and listhesis, where you want to see if it is static or dynamic, or when the MRI is normal, the X-ray is normal, but still you have a high suspicion that there is some dynamic component, then you do a dynamic view. Okay. So that is basically what dynamic views are all about. Okay. Now, let's say we have an X-ray. We move to the next set of investigation, and that is a CT scan. CT scan is basically big brother of an X-ray. Okay. So everything that you can see on a X-ray can be seen much better on a CT scan, which means there's excellent Boli delineation. It is a quick image, which means it does not take time, like it's not a 45 minutes to 1 hour test, it's a quick image. The other thing is the tube is small, so the patient does not feel claustrophobic. You can combine a CT scan with a myelogram and get an idea similar to what you get on an MRI. I will explain later on when the myelogram images are seen. And CT scan is the only imaging which we can do when MRI is contraindicated. MRI is contraindicated in certain cases, like when patient has got a pacemaker or patient has got a clip in the brain. Okay. So just 1 second. Huh? Yeah. So that's basically the when MRI is contraindicated. Remember, if a patient has got an implant, an orthopedic implant, a spine implant, MRI is not contraindicated. MRI is contraindicated only when you have got a pacemaker and a brain implant. Dobara mat puchna, because there's so many questions that isko femur ka nail dala hai, can we do an MRI? Okay. The limitation of CT scan is one, that there is a lot of radiation. So that is one thing. Second thing is soft tissue we are not able to delineate. Okay. And sometimes when there are stress fractures, okay, they might not be seen on a CT scan if they are acute. All right. So here CT scan is similar to an X-ray. You have to read it also in the similar way. You have to see the sagittal section and you have to see the alignment. You have to see if there's any gross different, if there's a miss in the alignment. So here you see that at this stage, there's a disruption in the spinal column. Again, here there's a disruption of the spinal column. So this is something that you see in a CT scan. The other thing is about bone destruction. So here you see that on an MRI, you can see that there is some problem over here. If you do an X-ray of this patient, the X-ray is going to come completely normal. But when you actually see the CT scan, you'll see there's going to be a lot of bony destruction. So this patient, this is very, very specific and sensitive to bone loss, which means it will pick up every bone loss and it is going to pick up bone loss completely. All right. So that is basically bone loss. So the question that someone had asked me about 40 to 50% of bone loss is this. Here there's not a lot of bone loss. So MRI and X-ray is not going to show, but CT scan is going to show you that. Then CT myelogram. So sometimes what happens is we have the CT scan. The patient is completely complaining of a symptom of lumbar canal stenosis. And you want to see is really does the patient have stenosis or not. So the best form of investigation for stenosis is an MRI. All right. But in certain patients, you are not able to do MRI, or sometimes MRI is just not available. What to do in those situations is where you do a CT myelogram. A CT myelogram is where a dye is injected in the caudal epidural space. So you inject a dye from here. The dye goes in this area, which is seen as this bright white spot. And whenever there is compression, what will happen is you will see that the dye is not passing. So this MRI tells that this patient is having 3 levels of compression because of lumbar canal stenosis. And this patient clinically can complain of back pain, can also complain of a lot of leg pain and claudication. Okay. Now you can also see one thing is you can see this black spots in the disc area. Okay. So these black spots are called as vacuum signs. Vacuum signs are most commonly seen easily seen on a CT scan, but it can also be seen on an X-ray, which means on an X-ray, you will see bones and you're going to see empty disc space and suddenly a black spot. This black spot indicates that there is a lot of axial or dynamic instability at that place. So that's basically what a vacuum sign is all about. Okay. So this is all about CT scan and X-rays. I think whatever I've spoken about CT scan and X-ray is more than enough for now, because technically when you're talking about spine, the best investigation is a MRI. Okay. So again, yeah. So some questions now. One question is about CT myelogram. Okay. So now what happens is, let's say we have a patient with this kind of CT. You see this CT? This CT is very well telling us there is some bone loss over here. and obviously the patient has been operated prior over here, because I can't see the lamina and I can't see the spinous processes. Okay. But I don't know if the nerves are getting compressed over here or not. I tell the patients that, do we get an MRI? The patient has got a pacemaker and MRI is not possible. What to do then? Okay. Then I need to find out if there is any compression over here or not. So here I can use something called as myelogram. Okay. In a myelogram, what is done is a dye is injected over here, and the dye passes through the spinal column. And at places where, sorry, just one second. Yeah. So at places where there is compression, yeah, the dye will not pass. And that is what is seen on a, sorry, just one second. Yeah. So that is what is seen on a CT myelogram. All right. So that's all about your CT scan. And sometimes on CT scan or on an X-ray, you can see a dark black patch over here. It's not very clearly visible over here, but it will be black. Yeah. And that is vacuum sign indicative of instability, either axial or dynamic. All right. So that's all about CT scan. If there are any other questions regarding CT scan, after we finish our MRI, you start posting the questions later on. Okay. So let's get back to the most important investigation, and that is MRI. Now the MRI is the best possible investigation for the spine. Okay, someone is playing around with the screen. Don't put tick marks, don't put annotations, because otherwise I'll have to shut down all the annotations. Okay. MRI is the best possible treatment. Sorry, this one. Yeah, great. So MRI is the best possible investigation for the spine, because one is you're able to see the bones, you're able to see the soft tissues, you're able to see the disc, you're able to see the cord, and you're able to identify any pathology way sooner than it starts appearing on a CT scan or an X-ray. And lastly, the most important thing is there's zero radiation. Means you can do 1,000 MRIs in your life and you'll never have a problem. Okay. The other thing is you can administer contrast medium, which will help you delineate pathologies much better. Okay. The disadvantages are that the bony anatomy cannot be very clearly, like bones cannot be as clearly differentiated as in a CT scan. But with a newer 3 Tesla MRIs, even that can be taken care of. Pacemakers is another problem, because when you have pacemakers, especially old generation pacemaker, you're not able to do your MRI. You're not able to do MRIs. Okay. Now, whenever you have an MRI, now you have to start. Okay, someone stop playing with the screen, please. Give me 1 second. Let me stop with the annotations. Yeah. Anyways, so here, what do you see on an MRI? How to read an MRI? Before that, you should know what T1 and T2 weighted images are. Okay. So whenever you have an MRI in front of you, you should be able to, before that, identify T1 and T2. So now what exactly an MRI is? Okay. So MRI is like a big tube where the patient goes inside. And when the patient goes inside, that magnet fires. The magnetic beams are taken up by the tissues and they are let go. When they are let go, they are picked up on a screen, on a machine, which transmits it on a screen. And depending upon how the images are captured, you are able to see what it is. So there is something called as hyper intense and hypo intense or iso intense. There are 3 different things that is there on the whenever you're talking in terms of reading an MRI. And based on that, you get 2 main type of sequences, and that is called as T1 sequence and T2 sequence. Don't worry, you don't need to buy out all of this. I just wanted to put it here, right? So whenever you have got a T1 weighted, whenever you get MRI, you typically get 4 films. 2 are T1 weighted images, 2 are T2 weighted images. So what you need to know is, in a T2 weighted image, your water is going to look black in color, white in color, and your bone is going to look black in color. Okay. And in a T1 weighted image, your water is going to look black in color, whereas the fat is going to look white in color. This is the most important thing you have to understand for T1 and T2 weighted images, and you'll start following everything through. So basically, if water is going to appear white in T2 and black in T1, fat is going to appear white in T1. These are the two basic things you understand, and then I will proceed further about this. Yeah. So the next thing is you need to know what are the different types of images. So you have sagittal images and you have axial images. Okay. Sagittal images are images where the patient is made to stand like this and the spine is cut like this, and you start getting this kind of picture. You see, this is exactly same that you look here. So that's the sagittal section. When the spine is cut from the top like this is what you start seeing, and that's the axial cuts that you will get. All right. So when you have the sagittal image in front of you, then you have to start differentiating which is a T2 and which is a T1. So a T2 is where your spinal canal is going to appear white because it is full of CSF, which in turn is water. Okay. So T2 weighted image, this is going to look white. Whereas in T1 weighted images, this is going to look black. Okay. So that is how you differentiate a sagittal T1 and T2 weighted images, right? Then you further see the sagittal sections. So if you then, once you have identified what a T1 sagittal is and T2 sagittal is, then you take the T2 sagittal, which means the one that is looking white. That's the only one that you have to take in your hand. Okay. That you take in your hand, and what you see is there are 16 images, 4, 4, 4, 4 in a line they are put. Okay. So what does those 16 images mean? Okay. So that 16 images are basically cuts which are done from one side of the spine to other side, which means most likely they are done from the right to the left. You can also see over here in the corner somewhere it must be written R to L. Okay. So that's basically what the sagittal images are for. Understood? So then you need to identify 3 images in the sagittal spine. One is the mid sagittal image. A mid sagittal image is image which is going to look to you just like an X-ray, which means you will see the bones, you will see the spinal canal, you will see the spinous process. So that is the mid sagittal view. But as soon as so that is basically the view at this point seen in this direction. But when the spine is taken towards the lateral aspect, okay, and a cut is made to this, what you see is you see the bones, you see the pedicle, and you see the foramen. So that is the parasagittal cuts that you are seeing, which means so from right to left, when you see a sagittal T2 weighted image, you are seeing the rightmost part of the spine going to the leftmost part. Understood? So that is how you decipher the sagittal sequence. Understood? Sometimes the spine is crooked. Okay. So in that case, what happens is when you actually cut the spine like this place might be mid sagittal, whereas this place might be parasagittal because the cut is going like this. Okay. So in degenerative scoliosis, sagittal images does not have a lot of importance. Okay. There you need to look at the axial cuts. Remember I was saying you have sagittal and axial. So axial cuts are what this is, where you cut the spine forward. Okay. So before going to axial cut, you should know what the keyhole is. So remember the anatomy. Your nerves pass through your spinal canal and they come out at the intervertebral foramen. Okay. So that's the keyhole which you are able to see over here. Yeah, that is basically your keyhole. So that is something that you have to identify, and that you are going to be able to identify on the parasagittal cut, which means the rightmost side parasagittal cut and leftmost side parasagittal cut will tell you about the keyhole, which will tell you if a disc fragment has come out and is it irritating the nerve root. Like here you can see that this is your keyhole and this is your nerve root passing out. All right. Here you can see something that is irritating the nerve root over here. So that's basically what you're supposed to see in a keyhole. Okay. So wherever you have a disc prolapse and you have got some nerve compression, you will see that the keyhole is obliterated. Yeah. Then comes the axial sequences. Axial sequences are basically where you cut the spine from the top and you see. Now the cutting of the spine typically happens at the upper end plate level, at the level of the pedicle, at the level of the lower end plate, and at the level of the disc space and the facet joint. So every time you will see you are having L4, L4-5, L4-5, L5, L5. So always an axial cut is going to happen like this, where you have got multiple sequences. So what exactly do you see on an axial sequence? Again, when you get an axial sequence, identify the T2 weighted axial sequence. Or T2 weighted axial sequence is an axial sequence that is going to appear white in the center and not black. When you take it in your hand, you are again going to get mostly 16 images, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like that. Sometimes they are labeled, sometimes they are not labeled. Okay. But basically what you should see is there's always a small pilot image that is given in the corner, where where numbers are given, and based on the number, so you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 10 number, when you see, you will know that that's an axial sequence at the level of 4, 5. Okay. Once you identify your T2 weighted image and you have your axial sequence in hand, then you have to start identifying and knowing what your axial sequence are. For you to understand, you have to always identify the axial sequence at the level of disc space, because the crux of the problem appears here. All right. So how do you identify that? So when you're looking at the different axial sequence, the front goal part is just the body. The posterior part is the spinous process. Yeah. The central part is where your nerves are, the cord is going from. And this is where your nerves are exiting. Okay. So that's your central part. That's your spinous process. That's where the nerves are exiting. And that's your cord with the traversing route. Okay. The central canal is what you have to see, and the place where you see the central canal is at the level of the disc space. Okay. And how to identify that? Where you are able to see a proper burger is where you have to see. So when you are able to see one bun, two bun, and center is which is the level of this space. So here what you're able to see, you're able to see one bun over here. You're able to see a little bit of bun over here, and you can't see it completely separate. So this is not the correct sequence where you want to see the central canal. You would want to see it in some axial cut which is looking like this, where you have got your body, you have got your spinous process, you have got your one bun, you have got your second bun. So that is the representative level at your facet joints. Okay. And this is where you see your central canal, if it is free or not. So from here to here, this place is what is your central canal. So wherever you have got your central canal stenosis, you will see this. A disc must have come out and it is reducing the space for your central canal, or a soft disc might have come out, or one side disc might have come out. So this is how you identify that the central canal is stenosed. So based on where it has come out, it is either central or parasagittal, paracentral. Okay. So that is how you see your central canal. Then you proceed to something called as lateral recess. So lateral recess is that place which is from the level of your, where your central canal ends till where it goes out, which means the area of the foramen, which means on a model, this part that is there is basically what is called as a lateral recess. So lateral recess is here that you see. Again, lateral recess you see at the level of the facet joint, and you comment if there is any lateral recess stenosis or not. So you see here, the central canal is slightly compressed because of something growing over here. And if you see this side, the space is a little less as compared to this side. Okay. So that is basically what lateral recess stenosis is about. So when you see different types of lateral recess stenosis, you will see that it is blocked on one side. Like how, you know, it is blocked here, but here it is completely free. Okay. Or it is blocked on both the sides. So here you know that this patient has got left-sided lateral recess stenosis. Okay. Again, universal dictum. Whenever you are seeing a spine or any imaging, this is left and that is right. Okay. So you are seeing a mirror image. Okay. So that is basically what lateral recess stenosis is all about. Okay. So now that you understand what are the different types of sequences that you're going to get, what is a sagittal section, what is an axial section, what and where you are supposed to see, I will quickly tell you how you have to go about reading an MRI. And then we will come to the part wherein how the MRIs are going to look different in different situations. Okay. Then I am going to talk to you about the different special types of MRI. So you have got the stir images, you have got the contrast MRI, you have got dynamic MRIs. Okay. So I'll quickly brush through what I have spoken about, but this time I'm going to talk about how you have to go about reading an MRI. When an MRI comes in front of you, you are most likely going to have 4 images. Okay. These 4 images, you take it in your hand and you segregate it between an axial image and the sagittal image. Axial images are where you'll see this on the MRI, and sagittal images where you're going to see this on an MRI. Once you have those 2 images segregated, you take 2 sagittal images and see which is T1 and which is T2. Now, how to differentiate between the two is you have to see the CSF. If the CSF is white, it is T2. If the CSF is black, then it is T1. Okay. Once you segregate between T2 and T1 weighted image, you then differentiate. You take the 2 images in your hand. First, you take a sagittal T2 weighted image. Then you take an axial T2 weighted image. Okay. So you take your sagittal T2 weighted images in your hand. Then you take your axial T2 weighted image. Keep it separately. Then you take a sagittal T1 weighted image and sagittal T2 weighted image in your hand. Axial T2 weighted image in your sorry, so many messages. I'm getting a little distracted. 1 minute. Yeah. So you have 4 images. What you see is first take your sagittal T2, axial T2. Then you take your sagittal T1 and axial T1. It is always important that you go through all the sequence in this form, because all of your degenerative conditions will be identified in a T2 weighted image. T1 weighted image is going to just show you something additional, which I'll tell you what. And in this sequence only you progress, so you don't get confused. Okay. Next is, once you have that, then you get your bearing straight, which means then you see which is the rightmost parasagittal image, which is the leftmost parasagittal image, which is the mid sagittal image. So which means that where your spine is cut from the middle, where it is cut from the right side, where it is cut from the left side. Okay. Then you identify your mid sagittal T2 weighted image, and then you start seeing this same thing. You see the alignment, then you see your spinal cord, then you see the posterior element, see the color of the body, see if there is any gross change in the color of the body. Then you see the discs if there is any problem, and then you see the alignment. So here what I can see is everything is looking totally fine, except this disc is looking black and it's come out a little bit. Okay. So here you then want to go to your axial weighted image, and in your axial in your axial T2, what you want to do is identify this place. Why? Because here you know that the disc has come out. You don't know if it has come out on the right side, if it has come out on the left side, how much is there central stenosis, how much is there lateral stenosis. So the next step that you do is you see your axial images. Okay. And in the axial images, what you're going to do is you're going to identify the image at the level of the disc space, which means you're going to see that best image where you are able to see the facet joints completely, which means you're able to see one facet which looks like one bun of the burger. Then you look at the other facet which looks like the other bun of the burger. Okay. And that where it is completely seen like this, that is your image. So this is not an ideal image, but this is an ideal image. So at the level where you found a problem in the sagittal cut, you look at the axial cut. And at that axial cut, all you have to see is there any stenosis in the center, or is there any stenosis in the side? And if it is there, then it is on which side? So here you have it. Here you are able to identify that the patient has got a problem at the L5S1 level disc, and the problem is more on the, hypothetically, more on the left side than the right side. So this patient should have some kind of left-sided leg pain with back pain, which means there's a clinico-radiological match. So this is how you go about reading all these MRI. Okay. Now, once you have seen your axial cut and you know that there is something on the okay, and now the mid sagittal, you look at the parasagittal. Okay, and in the parasagittal, identify a disc which is on the right side. Yeah, so now you know that you have a problem at the L5S1 disc, which is on the right side. So you see the right side keyhole and see if there is any compression in the keyhole or the nerve root is free. So how the nerve roots look on the keyhole is you can see white color with a black spot. So these black spots are your nerve roots. Where there is a problem, you will see an obliteration of the keyhole like this. Okay. So that is basically how you're going to go about reading a MRI, right? So see that's how your keyhole will be obliterated. Whereas at other places, you are able to see the keyhole well, and you are able to see your nerve roots well. Okay. So that's basically all about your T2 weightage, sagittal and axial. All right. Once that is done, then you have to start identifying every pathology and the significance. So that's basic reading of an MRI. Now, how you should know how a disc is going to look on MRI, how an LCS is going to look on an MRI, how infections are going to look on an MRI. Okay. So this is how your normal spine is going to be. A normal spine is well aligned with the discs which are showing white color in a T2 weighted image, which means there is adequate amount of water. Okay. When they get degenerated, they start becoming black. So they start looking at, they start losing their water content, and the flexibility goes away. And like old sofas, they get collapsed and they start getting bulged. So that is called as disc bulge. This is a very normal finding on an MRI. So this is not very clinically significant. Sometimes the disc material, the annular stairs and the annular stairs and the nucleus pulposus, or the main crux of the disc, it protrudes outside. Okay, and hits the nerve root. So that is called as a prolapsed intervertebral disc. Okay, and sometimes it gets extruded, so it comes out completely, and that is called as an extruded disc. Sometimes that extruded fragment gets completely separated from the main disc, and that is called as a sequestrated disc. Okay, so that is how a normal disc looks on an MRI, which slowly degenerates and causes multiple level disc bulges, which are completely normal. It is as good as having 40% heart block. When it becomes a problem, it becomes a prolapse intervertebral disc, which sometimes can be extruded. Okay, so that is the different types of disc bulges that you have. Okay, so on an MRI, what you're going to see, yeah, on an MRI, what you're going to see is this. You'll have multiple discs which are normal, multiple discs which are degenerated, and at some stage you might have a disc which has come out. So that's an extruded disc that you have. Now here you want to see that ye disc right side mein hai ya left side mein hai, right? So you know now that the patient has got back pain, which can be explained by this degenerate disc. You know the patient is having leg pain also. Now is the leg pain because why is the leg pain? So here, and is it because of the disc only? So here you want to see the axial cut. Okay, and in the axial cut you will see that the disc has come out on the right side, which is pressing the right sided traversing nerve root. So I'm introducing new terms over here. Eventually you'll come to know what that means. So here the disc is basically compressing on the right sided traversing nerve root. So this patient, if the patient is complaining of right sided leg pain, so everything matches over here and you start treating the patient for the disc. Understood? Next is what happens to the disc which is degenerated. So a disc degeneration, if you follow the Kirkle-Willis classification of degeneration, you have a normal looking disc which will start losing its water content and eventually start bulging and then auto stabilizing. So this is the different forms of disc degenerations that you're going to see on an MRI. Okay, and all of this will cause only and only one thing, and that is back pain. Okay, only when the disc extrudes, okay, is when they start complaining of leg pain because of the disc problem. Okay, so now coming to a case of a prolapse intervertebral disc, how you read an MRI. Okay, so and every time that summary will happen. So here you identify the white wala MRI, which is the T2 sagittal. See that the problem is lying at the L4-5 disc space. Okay, now why I said L4-5 is because either it is going to be marked on the scan, okay, or you can count from down. So the radiologists are going to count the vertebrae from the top. So C1, C2 to C7, then D1 to D12, L1 to L5. Okay, sometimes what happens is that L5 is stuck to your sacrum. Okay, so there is not a lot of movement over there, and that is called as sacralization. So what happens is that the L5 spinous process is stuck to your sacrum, and that is called as sacralization, which means you just have 4 effective mobile lumbar vertebrae. Okay, sometimes the sacrum, instead of being 5, can be only 4. So you have 1 additional sacrum. So here you will find that instead of L5, the radiologists you find that there is a 6 lumbar vertebrae, which is actually the sacral vertebrae, which has not fused to the other part of the sacrum. Understood? So that is where you have that problem of labeling issues. So don't get confused. Whatever the radiologist has marked over there, that is what you have to count. So sometimes you might realize that this is where you have L4, L5, and this is S1. Okay, but don't be confused. That's because of the labeling issues. So here, what you're identifying, there is some problem at L4-5. Okay, you can see that the disc is black, it is degenerated, and it has also come out of its place. Here you see the axial cut, and you see that it has come out on the right side. Means the place where the nerve exits on the right side has deteriorated. All right, and that is right-sided lateral recess stenosis. So this patient should have low back pain and right-sided leg pain. If this matches, everything is matching. Okay, so that is a disc MRI. Okay, what you see is you see the location of the disc. You also see if the disc has migrated up or migrated down, and you sometimes see if there's a far lateral disc prolapse. So these are special disc prolapse. Now most of your disc prolapse will happen in the center. It will happen in the paracentral area. But sometimes you have a lateral disc prolapse, which irritates the lateral exiting nerve root, which is seen on a axial cut like this. Okay, so MRI will tell you where is the disc, what side the disc has come out, how big is the disc, and which all nerve roots it is going to compress. All right, so that is important in a disc. Sometimes an infection, okay, will appear to be similar to a disc on a T2 weighted image, which means you will see that something like that has come out and everything. That is where your T1 weighted image is going to help you. Okay, so T1 weighted image see, remember I told you water is going to look black on T1. That is the only thing that you have to remember. So if the disc has come out and the bones, which are supposed to look like this, start looking black in color, then you have to start thinking that there is a lot of water in the body where water should not have been there. Means that most likely there is some kind of an infection over here. So this is where the T1 weighted image helps. Okay, sometimes where there is a acute disc prolapse, okay, you will see a black disc and something coming out. Yeah, at that time, if you see a T1 weighted image, you will be able to see the entire size of the disc absolutely correctly, because the acute disc is usually full of water. So it becomes very clear on a T1 weighted image. Okay. So in a T1 weighted image, what you are able to see is one is if there's a bigger chunk and soft extruded chunk which has come out apart from a chronic chunk, or is there an additional infection in that? So this is the only role of T1 weighted image when you are seeing a patient with a disc problem. Okay. Yeah. So sometimes it becomes difficult for you to, let's say you have a patient like this. You have seen a actual image of a patient where the patient is having a lot of left-sided leg pain, but you're not able to delineate why the patient has got a lot of leg pain. Okay. Because in the sagittal, in the T2 weighted image, you're not able to really pinpoint that. That same patient, when you see the T1 weighted actual image where your cord is going to look black instead of white, you might see that one side everything is fine, but the other side there is a problem. So there is some dark thing that you are able to see on the other side, which you are not able to see in a normal image. And in some other image, you are able to see something over there. So this, you see this light whitish color, that is actually a big disc which has come out. And this big new acute disc you are not able to see very well on a T2 weighted image because it's full of water. That you are able to see very well clearly on a T1 weighted image. So when someone asked me that do you need to see the T1 weighted image, yes, you need to see the T1 weighted images when after you have finished your T2, just to make sure there is no infection. And if it is a disc case, or if you're not sure why there is a lot of problem, you want to see if there's any acute extruded fragment which is full of water which is not picked up on this scan. So there is where the T1 weighted image is going to help you. So now next time when you get a PID patient, start following this and eventually start reading the report. Then you will be able to read. So what you can do is you can take all the images, tell the patient that you're going to document them, go in some separate room, start reading the MRI, start seeing the report and correlate, and then go back to your patients. That is the only way you're going to learn this. There is no other simpler way of learning this. All right. Then you see some patient who's having lower back pain, which was going on, and suddenly the patient has got locked. Means sudden increase in back pain. That happens because the disc has had an annular tear, which means the outer protective layer of the disc has torn. That on an MRI is going to look like a white spot on a black disc. Okay, which means that the patient has got an annular tear, which is reported as a high intensity zone on a disc. Okay, and whenever you see an MRI like this, you have to be careful, because here if you're doing a range of motion exercises for the patient, when the spasms are there, the entire disc might herniate out through this annular tear. Okay, so this is the MRI of a discogenic back pain. Now remember I told you that that disc was compressing the traversing nerve root. Okay, so what does this mean is whenever the cord, or whenever the nerve starts from your brain, you've got the spinal cord, you've got your spinal cord which goes through your dorsal spine, the cervical and dorsal spine, and in the lumbar spine it splits up. Okay, forming roots. Okay, and that root goes through the lumbar spine, and at every place the root is going from here and it is coming out of one foramen. So between the L1 and L2, the L1 nerve is exiting. Okay, so between L1 and L2, the L1 nerve is exiting, and the L2 nerve is going down, which is coming down from here. So the nerve that comes out of the foramen between the two bodies is called as the exiting nerve, and the one that goes through there is called as a traversing nerve. Why it is important is for your clinico radiological correlation. Okay, so now if so this is basically where you're seeing the spine from like this and cutting the spine. When you cut the spine, you have got your L4 body, you've got your L5 body, and the disc has come out. So you see here what is happening is that the L4 root has already exited from the L4 foramen, and the disc is going to cause pressure to the L5 root, which means when the patient has got a L4-5 posterolateral disc, it is going to press your L5 nerve root. Okay. But when you have a foraminal or an extra foraminal disc, it will press your L4 nerve root, which means that if a patient has got a large disc at L4-5, which is posterolateral, the patient will get a L5 nerve root compression, and he will present to you with nerve L5 root pain and EHL weakness. Whereas if the patient has got a L4-5 posterolateral, or not posterolateral, foraminal or a extra foraminal disc prolapse, the patient will present with a L4 dermatome pain and a foot drop. Okay, so that is basically what this is all about. Okay, then comes the next pathologies where there is stenosis. So a stenosis MRI cannot be missed, because what you will see is, you will see a typical MRI which is dirty looking. Okay, which means old patient, the bodies are not looking square, you're seeing different colors in the body, means there's some kind of osteoporosis, all the discs essentially are black in color, and you are able to see some malalignment of the spine. So this is typically an MRI of a degenerative spine. Here you need to find out if this degenerative spine is of a patient who is having lumbar canal stenosis, or is it just normal degenerative spine. So here what you have to do, again, identify the T2 weighted image, then look at the mid sagittal T2 weighted image, not the parasagittal image. You see the difference between the mid sagittal and parasagittal. Mid sagittal, everything is, you are seeing the entire spinal cord, but here you are not seeing all of that. So this is parasagittal. Once you see that, what you have to see is which is the place where your cord is getting compressed. So here you see this, यहाँ पे कुछ तो गड़बड़ है, यहाँ पे कुछ तो गड़बड़ है, यहाँ पे of course there is कुछ गड़बड़, but all of this is looking fine. ठीक है. So one thing, it's a no-brainer that all of these patients with so much of degeneration is going to have back pain. Here you are trying to see the MRI not to prove back pain, but to know where is the nerve compression. So here sagittal में कुछ तो गड़बड़ दिख रहा है at this place. So what you want to do is, you want to go to the T2 axial, and T2 axial at 3-4 level, at 4-5 level, and at 5-S1 level. Okay. So here at the 4-5 level, when you do an axial cut, what you are seeing here is that the space for the cord has reduced. Your lateral recess is reduced. Your facet joints are not looking like your typical good looking facet joints like a burger, where you have got a clean bun here, and some cheese in between. What you're seeing is degenerated facet. You are seeing the ligamentum flavum, which is hypertrophied. You are seeing that the disc, okay, is coming back. Ideally, your disc is supposed to be like this. Okay. So your disc is coming back like this, and the lateral recesses are also obliterated. So this patient has got lumbar canal stenosis because of a degenerative disc disease and facetal hypertrophy. Understood? So this is basically how you read a stenosis ka X-ray. So now the facet joints are this. You've got one bun, you've got other bun, and you've got cheese. One bun, other bun, and cheese. Normal looking facet. All right. An arthritic facet is going to look either where there is a lot of cheese, which means the central white becomes fat. So that indicates that there is fluid facet effusion or loose facet joints. Understood? That is the first thing. Then you see there is hypertrophic of the ligamentum flavum on that. So ligamentum flavum is, which is here, okay, which is here in between. So that is basically what you are seeing here, okay, in a facet arthritis. So different types of facet arthropathies like this. You will see unequal looking facet. You will see one facet which is too fat than the other facet. You will see that the cheese has gone away. So you have got cheese here, but you have no cheese over here. And the alignment of the facets are sometimes different, which means your one alignment and this alignment is like this. So both facets are like this. Sometimes the facets appear like this. So those are the different types of facet arthritis that you get. Okay. Sometimes what you see is, you don't see a very arthritic facet, but you see that it is a little arthritic, and you see that one side pe there is some white bright spot. So this is what a facet cyst is going to look like. So that is going to be near the facet, and it's going to be a bright white spot. Okay, so that is how your facet cysts are going to look, and eventually surgically you remove that. Now facet cysts are basically extension of your synovial ligament. All right, synovial lining, which fills in with fluid, and that becomes facet cysts, causing acute increase in one side of leg pain. All right. Now is the most important question is, chalo हमने identify तो कर दिया, how much is a stenotic canal? Doc, my MRI says that there is 9 mm space. So is it significant? My MRI says that there is space which is just 7 mm. Is it significant? So technically numbers cannot denote if it is significant or not. It is the clinico-radiological correlation which is important. So here, if the patient is having significant claudication, okay, that when you see on an MRI showing that there is compression, then it is called as a significant compression. Whereas a patient is telling that there is no claudication, there is no leg pain, whatever the MRI shows, the compression in that MRI is not clinically significant. Understood? Which means that if you see these two MRIs, here what is happening is you can see that there is compression of the central canal and there is loose facets over here. Whereas here you are seeing that the central canal is good enough, the facet joints are good enough, but you can see that there is a disc which has come back out, and this is causing compression. Now, if you look at just the imaging, this is obviously looking way more compressed than this. Yeah. But this patient was not operated. This patient required a surgery, because although this patient had got a lot of compression, with the help of exercises, he was able to easily walk for 30 minutes without any problem. So this is not clinically right now relevant for me. But this patient, in spite of having a block, in spite of doing everything, the patient still was complaining of symptoms. And hence, this is a significant MRI which eventually required a microdiscectomy. So reading it directly cannot tell you if it is significant or not. That's why again and again I'm telling you, a clinico-radiological correlation is very important. Okay. Sometimes what happens is that the patient has got a lysis, which means that he's a young patient with weakness in the bones, and suddenly there's a fracture and a new acute lysis has formed. Okay. And this is basically called as stress lysis. Now these stress lysis or lysis basically are sometimes easily picked up on an MRI in the initial phases. Okay. In an initial phase, why? Is because the first step is you develop lysis, and eventually the lysis then progress into lytic listhesis, which means that there's break in the bone. Then the pressure on the disc increases, that disc degenerates quickly, and then you start getting instability. So a lysis sometimes becomes very difficult to identify on an MRI. But when that patient becomes a lytic listhesis, then you can easily identify it, because here what you will see that there is a problem in the alignment. Okay. And when you actually see the axial cut at the level of the alignment, you will see that the lateral recess is looking very dirty, as if someone has just smudged the lateral recess, but the central canal is looking more open than usual. That is a typical extrapolation of a lytic listhesis on a MRI. Otherwise, the ideal mode of identifying lysis on an MRI is not on an MRI. It is actually on a X-ray, which is done in an oblique view, where you see a Scotty dog sign. Okay. But in a listhetics segment, you can always end up seeing a listhetic. When there is already a gross listhesis, you will be able to identify if it is a degenerative listhesis or a lytic listhesis. Now, why this lytic and degenerative listhesis identifying on an MRI is important? The practical point is, you know, where there's a lytic listhesis, what happens is that the posterior part of the spine disconnects from the anterior part. So the spine shifts in the front, leaving the posterior part behind, which means there is never any central stenosis, which means चाहिए तो भी ये patient कभी life में paralyzed नहीं हो सकता है. Okay. So this is important, and the symptoms are always going to be lateral recess symptoms, which means if it's a L4-5 lytic listhesis, the patient will have a problem with L4 nerve root. Okay. And also you need to identify that the patient has got lytic listhesis, because the protocols for of exercises for a lytic listhesis, a degenerative listhesis and LCS is completely different, which I really don't need to teach you. You know that. Yeah. So that's the lytic listhesis. Whereas a spondylolisthesis, which is because of a degenerative condition, is going to again appear like this, wherein you will have a malalignment at one place and a compression there. But when you actually, I've not put the axial cut, but when you actually see the axial cut of that listhesis, it is going to exactly appear like this, which means you will see a severe central stenosis. So that listhesis is not lytic, because there what has happened is that the entire spine along with your posterior elements is shifted in front. So there is no central canal. Why it is important is because a patient with degenerative listhesis has a clear risk of developing neurological deficits. Understood? So that is how you differentiate between a lytic and a degenerative listhesis, right? So now you have a scenario where the patient is, apart from all this, complaining of a neck problem. So when the patient is having a neck problem, you're going to get a neck X-ray done. Okay. And in the neck X-ray is also the same phenomena, the same principles are there. You have to see the quality of the bone, you have to see the alignment, you have to see the disc space, you have to see degenerative changes in the form of osteophyte formation. You have to identify the facet joints in the back. You have to see the spinous process. You have to see if you can adequately see your entire neck. So you see your C1, C2 to C7. And in the AP view, again, you see your alignments well. Now, the only important thing that you are going to identify on a neck X-ray, because mind you, everybody who's about the age of 20, you do a neck X-ray, will show certain of the degeneration. Okay. So here you see how bad is the degenerative changes. If the degenerative changes are very bad, okay, and the foramen, you see this space, this here, the foramen is completely obliterated. There is a posterior osteophyte formation. The facet joints here, which are normal, here you can see them obliterated. So these are patients where you want to be careful. You want to see and assess for myelopathy signs, because there is a chance that the cord going through here might be completely pressed at this degenerative changes. So this is the only thing that is going to help you with your neck X-rays. So certain other things where your neck X-rays are important are dynamic, where you want to see flexion extension and you see there is a at C1, C2 instability. Okay. Or the entire X-ray is normal, except at one place you see significant degeneration with collapsed disc space. So you can safely say that there is a C4-5 degenerative disc, which is causing instability and causing the pain. But essentially nothing more than this you can get in a degenerative X-ray. MRI, again, what you have to look for is the same thing. You see the sagittal, you see the axial, you see the alignment, you see the soft tissue. So you can sometimes notice, especially in a trauma MRI, everything is normal and you see a black spot, white spot here. Indicates that the patient has got an injury over here and there is soft tissue disruptions over here. Okay. And you see the cord, sometimes you see the cord has swollen up and there is a lot of cord signal changes. So the three things that you are looking on in a cervical spine MRI is again the alignment. You're looking at the soft tissue, you're looking at the disc, and you're seeing the condition of the cord. Okay. So these are the things that you're looking at when you're looking at the cervical MRI. Okay. Yeah. Now, sometimes you see that there's a lot of signal changes, but you can't see any compression. There is where a dynamic MRI will help you, wherein in an extension, you can see the cord, which is completely free. But when you're flexing the neck, you can see that at the CV junction, the cord is getting compressed. So that's the role of a dynamic MRI. Remember, these are all special MRIs which should be done only if it is absolutely necessary. Okay. So typically when you're seeing a MRI of the cervical spine, you see again the T2 weighted image, you see the alignment, you see the discs, okay, and you see what is happening to the disc. If they are bulging in the back, you see the posterior elements, you see the cord. So here typically, if I have to read this, I'll say this is a sagittal T2 weighted MRI showing multiple level disc degeneration, multiple level facet hypertrophy, and cervical cord which is stenotic, maximum at C5 C6 with some cord signal changes. Okay, again the same rules apply. If I want to see more in detail what is happening over here, where I have a doubt, is there really a cord compression or no cord compression, you see the actual image at that same time. So actual image here, you see the front, back and sides, and you see the cord. If you see a circular structure with CSF all around, there is no compression, but you see here there is obliteration of CSF, so there is cord compression, which means for you what you have to identify is you have to see the two lateral recess and cord compression only. If there is cord compression, don't touch the patient, be aware. If there is no cord compression, don't be afraid. Okay, so this is something that is what you need to pick up on a neck MRI. Okay, here the patient had got cord compression. So what we did is we did a laminectomy, and after that when you see the spine, you will see that there is no cord compression. So this is for your eyes to understand what cord compression means like and what no cord compression means like, which means there is cord compression over here, there is maybe a little bit of cord compression here, but here the cord is just touching. There is no cord compression because on an actual image, if you see, there is no the entire cord is free on both sides. Okay, this is the place where there is compression. This is the actual image of that same compression. You see the cord is chaptod over there, and this is the image after surgery where the cord has opened up again. So this is for your eyes to understand what compression means, what degeneration means, and how your cord should really appear when it is normal. Understood? So that is cervical spine. So there was a so that is all about cervical spine. Just 1 second. Okay, now let's consider certain scenarios. Okay, you have got a young patient who has complaining of neck pain, and suddenly the patient is everything is fine and there is no neurology and everything. You're just doing standard exercises, and suddenly the patient develops locking of the neck and left hand pain. You do an MRI, and this is what you're going to see. You're going to see a soft disc or a white spot. Okay, so this explains the locking of your neck, which is an annular tear, and because it has tore on the left side, the left lateral recess is stenosed and can explain the left-sided radiculopathy. So this is how your cervical PID is going to look like. Okay, sometimes you get a young patient with mid back pain, which is very common. Just 2 weeks se pain hai, nothing dangerous there. You're doing exercises for the patient and everything, and the patient is not getting better. So what do? In that case, you ask the patient to get an MRI done. Okay, so because you've done everything and things are fine. On an MRI also, you're not seeing anything. Okay, but you know that that patient is not an idiot. You are not an idiot. You have examined everything. You're very specific ki kuch to gadbad hai. Okay, so when your MRI is looking normal, but the patient is very specific, then you start thinking about the red flag conditions. And what are the red flag conditions? Infections and tumors. Okay, one thing common between both of them is that they are going to involve your body and the disc, and there will be a lot of inflammation and edema over there, because a lot of water will go over there, a lot of blood will go over there, which is all going to present. But how do we differentiate this? So here is where your other images are going to help you, and that is the T1 weighted images and the STIR image. So this same patient, when I do a T1 weighted image, okay, a T2 weighted image, what is going to happen? A T2 weighted image is going to show this same thing. But when I do a stir image is basically a T1 weighted image where all the fat has also been taken out. So in stir, whatever appears white is water. So here, this same patient ka stir image, when you do, you will see that at this place, the body is looking white in color. Okay. Which means there is water in the body, which should not be there. Okay. So you get suspicious ki ye kya ho sakta hai. All right. So that is the role of a stir image. Okay. And that same stir image, when you actually see the parasagittal cut, you will see that the foramen is getting blocked by some white thing. So here you start thinking about that there is some pus or some tumor or something which is causing irritation here, and that is responsible for the radicular pain. So this is where stir image is going to help you. Okay, so stir image basically shines out the infected and the tumorous area. Okay, so let's say in a patient of TB, what you're going to get is you're going to get involvement of a body, you're going to get involvement of a disc space, or you're going to get involvement of a disc space and body, which means you'll have problem somewhere here, problem here, or problem over here, which means on an MRI, you'll have problem in the body, problem in the disc space, or everything. So body problem will look like in a stir image, one body will look white in color. Okay. Where you have a disc problem, you will see that all the other discs are fine or they are black in color, but at one place the disc is become bad and it is communicating with the body. So it's a spondylodiscal image that, you know, spondylodiscitis, which is presenting, which means it is involving the disc and the bones both. And somewhere you will see frank pus formation, which will look like all white. So this is how TB is going to look. So this is again an example of a T2 weighted image where you see a stir image, you will see that the infected bodies are going to light up. Okay. In TB, this is what you will see is bone problem, disc problem, or disc bone problem with pus formation. When you start treating this patient, either what is going to happen is the pus is going to reduce or pus is going to increase. Okay. So here the pus is increasing as compared to earlier. Okay. Yeah. And this is where the pus is decreasing. Don't bother about all these things. This is for some other part. But this is where your pus is increasing and this is where your pus is decreasing. Okay. Again, this is where your pus is decreasing a little bit and here the pus has completely reduced. So when you're seeing or treating a patient with tuberculosis, in your follow-up, what you're going to see is you're going to see if your pus is reducing or your pus is increasing or not. Okay, that is one thing that you can easily spot in a patient with tuberculosis. There are a lot more things that you see on an MRI in TB, but that's going to be a little complicated. So let's not get into that. For you, it's very simple. If you see that the pus quantity is reducing, you're sorted out. Okay, and pus is best appreciated in either in T2 weighted image, and sometimes if it is early stage, then stir will pick it up. Okay. Now this is again a section of MRI showing multiple disc vertebral issues. Okay. But these are not TB. So sometimes something that looks TB on an MRI might not be TB, because to diagnose pathological condition, you need to have histopathological confirmation. So that's why if you see something like this on a MRI, don't just jump that it is TB. It could be other things also which you should know about. Okay. So that is important. Sometimes you have in these pathological conditions something called as vertebra plana, which is a very common finding in spine, wherein one body is completely collapsed. And three things actually start presenting as vertebra plana. One can be early TB, one can be tumor, and the third part can be fracture. Okay. So when you have a vertebra plana, it could be osteoporotic fractures, wherein what you will see is that the entire spine will look very ganda, will not look completely gray in color, it will go gray, light gray, dark gray. So it will not give a very good painter's appearance. And that indicates that there is something going on with the body. The marrow is not healthy, means there's a chance that there is osteoporosis. Okay. And you will see that there is a collapse. But if suppose, so that's basically an osteoporotic fracture causing vertebra plana. But sometimes you will see that it is not in that manner, it is bulging out like a smooth body. Then you have to be suspicious that it could be tumor and it's not osteoporosis. And sometimes it is just different colors around the disc, which are modic changes. So these are the three things that you're looking at in this patients. So sometimes you have to differentiate that, is it modic changes? Is it tumor? Is it osteoporotic fracture? Or is it infection? There is where contrast MRI comes into picture, wherein you inject a contrast and you check it. So whichever are all the disease part, they will all completely pick it up and they will light up like a light bulb. Whereas something which is degenerative will not. The second part where you want to do a contrast MRI is where you're seeing a post-operative scan. A post-operative scan, you want to know is if it is just a scar tissue or is it a recurrent disc. So that's the two times you want to do a post-op contrast MRI. So for example, this is a normal sagittal T2. You can see that the patient has got a little bit. Okay. Now the problem is that the terrible leg pain. Terrible leg pain means the patient called me up and he's saying that, doc, I am just not able to lie down because as soon as I lie down, I get terrible leg pain. Okay. So I saw the MRI scan and the MRI scan is looking totally fine. So I was like, boss, there's some problem. Like you can't, something we are missing. So here, look what happened when we did the contrast scan. Did you see that? There's a big tumor which has completely taken up the intradural space and all the nerve roots are kinked in the past. Obviously, this patient will not be able to sleep. So there is where your contrast MRI is going to help you. Okay. So that's all about MRIs.